Texas men's and women's hoops continue to defend the Moody Center, and All-Star Weekend quite possibly was saved by an unlikely face that nobody saw coming. All this and more on College Press Box. Good evening and welcome to College Press Box. I'm your host, Joseph Duffey. We've got a great show for you this evening. And so, this past Saturday afternoon, the historic Red River rivalry was rekindled. This time, though, the site would be a raucous Moody Center, where number 6 Texas men's hoops have only lost once all season. So let's go to the Moody Center to revisit this exciting contest between familiar foes. Texas still tied for first in the Big 12, while Oklahoma sits the last position on the table. Beginning of the game, OU gets an offensive rebound, and their best player, Grant Sherfield, finds Sam Godwin, who tied his season high of 12 points. And the foul right there. For Texas, it would be hustle plays like this that kept Texas in the physical contest against OU. Look at Allen fighting and Cunningham hustling, and then Allen getting rewarded in the end. He had 15 on the day. Grant Sherfield, who leads OU in points per game, doing what he does best, and that's slashing towards the hole. He led the Sooners with 18. And then end of the half here, Horns playing solid defense, but the loose ball once again would end up in Sherfield's hands for an easy finish. And don't blink now, but unranked OU is tied against their top 10 rival on the road, putting up an excellent fight that nobody expected. Second half here, Mr. Clutch Sir Jabari Rice woke up in the second half and finished strong down low. Led the Horns in scoring with 24, still coming off the bench. And then here's Joe Bemasil, who would accelerate and get called a questionable foul right there. Brock Cunningham, he would knock down both freebies and would lead by 6. Rice one more time heating up. He would tie the game at 67. More solid defense here, but Carr on the break. Rice feeling himself. He's going to pull it for the heat check, and he's going to cash in. Moody Center erupting one more time for the Horns lead. OU would not go away, though, as Grant Sherfield would find a way on this tough shot to tie the game over Rice. Ronnie Terry electing not to call a timeout. Marcus Carr trying to go coast to coast to win the game for the Longhorns in the clutch Big 12 game. Can he win it? He can, and we've got OT. This second half, OT now. And Allen would finish tough right there for the and one. He shrugs again. Rice heating up one more time, putting the Longhorns more in front here. And then again, OU trying to tie the game here late in the stretch, but they cannot finish. Horns would win against their bitter rival and would move to a 10-4 record in the conference to guarantee a conference tie, again, for the time being. And now I'd like to welcome in our men's basketball analyst, Jordan Geelhoed. Thank you for joining us, Jordan.
Thank you for having me, Joe. It's 7:24. Do you know what time it is?
I think OU still sucks.
OU still sucks. That's right. That's right.
All right, man. So I want to start with this question here. Oklahoma came into the Moody Center struggling off a 13-13 record, but still managed to give the Longhorns trouble. Can you chalk this up to being a rivalry game, or were Texas' struggles evident on a deeper part of the problem?
I think that part of this can certainly be chalked up to a rivalry game, as there is a different level of physical play that OU delivered that Texas doesn't see all that often outside of Texas Tech, who also gave Texas a lot of trouble last week too. And it's not like Texas isn't built or more prepared for a more physical game, though, as they like to bully their opponents on defense and on the boards as well. But they seem to sort of get caught off guard by it early in the game. There was a bit of a scoring drought during the start of the game where Texas couldn't even buy a bucket until Brock Cunningham provided a bit of a spark, hitting back-to-back threes. And these slow starts aren't new for Texas either. It seems like they happen every game. Also a recurring instance for Texas, games coming down to the final seconds. Of course, very few rivalry games, especially Red River ones, are going to be blowouts because of the level of passion that both teams play with. But taking a game to overtime against a struggling unit like Oklahoma is far different than last-second wins over more quality opponents like Kansas State or Baylor. Not being able to close out games strong might prove to be a problem for Texas down the stretch.
Yeah, first half problem has been a consistent issue for Texas all season. Secondly, Jordan, thankfully, despite the struggles, the Longhorns still gutted out a victory over OU after an extra quarter of overtime. Who were some of the key players for Texas in crunch time that led to the victory?
Yeah, well, I may have said that Texas sometimes struggles with starting strong and finishing strong, but thankfully they're pretty darn good at that middle part. They're able to rally from deficits as they did it twice during the Red River game, thanks in no small part to Sir Jabari Rice. We saw some of his highlights earlier, but the sixth man provides instant life to the team anytime he comes off the bench and plays really well with both the first and second unit teams. And he took the game into his hands on Saturday, scoring a team-high 24 points. That's more than Marcus Carr and Timmy Allen while playing 10 less minutes than either of them. And while I'd love Rice to get folded into the starting rotation at some point, having him come off the bench is a great way to ensure that Texas's offensive attack doesn't have to slow down when the first team comes off the court. Also, Dylan Dessou had a pretty good game as well. He was a big presence down low deep into the second half and in overtime, and even though he did foul out in overtime, he was a crucial force on defense, and he also contributed 12 points, which isn't too shabby either.
It's so easy to root for Jabari Rice. What a great story. And then finally, Jordan, Texas has a tough final stretch of the season, on the horizon, playing all ranked opponents, starting with Iowa State and Baylor again later this week. How can the Longhorns continue to win games and hopefully end up winning the Big 12?
Yeah, it's a daunting task ahead for the Longhorns, but you know what they say. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. I know that's a weird analogy, but I promise it's a thing, okay? Basically, Texas needs to take this schedule one game at a time. Don't get too ahead of themselves and treat each one of them like their win or go home tournament games. Their last matchup against Iowa State didn't go very well as they got throttled in Ames, but thankfully this matchup is in Austin, and thankfully Iowa State has been on a bit of a skid recently, losing 3 of their last 4. So hopefully Texas can catch them at the right time. Next up is Baylor, who Texas played very well last time they met in the Moody Center, doing their best to contain their talented guards. However, with this upcoming matchup being in hostile territory in Waco, Texas is going to have to get even more physical and play even more defense in hopes to overwhelm the Bears' offensive attack. If they can end the week with 2 ranked conference wins, I'd say that Texas is in a pretty good position come Big 12 tournament time. Well, I mean, as good of a position as they can be with Kansas State and Kansas still on the horizon. But like I said, one bite at a time.
Yeah, the Longhorns have defended the Moody Center pretty well this season. All right, Jordan, thank you for joining us once more. Again, as always, when we come back to College Press Box, we're going to talk a bit of Lady Longhorns, women's basketball team who is still rolling. You don't want to miss it. Welcome back into College Press Box. The Lady Longhorns basketball team came into Sunday as winners of 7 of their last 8 games. Texas women's basketball hosted West Virginia in what was sure to be a great rebound after a tough loss just a week ago. Now joining me here for Texas women's basketball is our very own Robert Gonsoulin. How you doing, Robert?
Good, Joe. Thanks for having me on tonight.
That's awesome. I want to start with this question here. Texas earned yet another hard-fought win this weekend against West Virginia. There have been many games this year where the final scores were so close, but this one was just an outright dominant performance by the Horns. What exactly led to their success in this game?
Well, Joe, this win can mainly be attributed to Texas's shooting. They went 55.6% from 3 and 40.7% from the overall field. Players like Shaylee Gonzalez definitely led this front when shooting from beyond the arc. She shot 50% from 3 and also led the team in scoring with 18 points. Another major key in the Longhorns' win was being able to really dominate this game through their ability to rebound the ball. Overall, they led the Mountaineers in rebounding by a ratio of 53 to 27 rebounds. They nearly had double the rebounds that West Virginia had. Khadijah Faye had 11 total rebounds, 5 on defense and 6 on offense. Right now, Texas and West Virginia lead the Big 12 in points allowed at the 1 and 2 spots, respectively. But it was clear to see on Saturday that in between those 1 and 2 spots is a large margin that ultimately comes from who is able to grab the basketball off the boards better.
All right, taking all that good shooting and rebounding performances into account, who was the most important player for the Horns in this win?
Well, while many Longhorns contributed to the win, the person who stood out the most to me was our previously mentioned Shaylee Gonzalez. For starters, we already know that she went 50% from 3. She also took full advantage of the most important points you need to score, free throws. She knocked down all 7 of her attempts. 4 rebounds and 3 assists made up the rest of her stats. Right now, Gonzalez is averaging 12.4 points per game and had a 42.7% percentage as a guard. This ultimately can relieve Rory Harmon down the stretch, as Texas has another guard that they can rely on. Whenever Harmon is taking a rest and the Longhorns need someone else to bring the ball up the court, Shaylee Gonzalez's performance against West Virginia definitely proves she's the one that they can rely on to do it.
That veteran leadership taking more of a toll recently. Now Texas has a very important game coming up. Oklahoma, not only is this matchup big for rivalry purposes, but it's also extremely important for the first place spot in the Big 12 Conference. So what does Texas need to work on in order to overcome this matchup?
Right. So Oklahoma is a very talented team. Right now they are tied with Texas for first place in the Big 12 standings with a 12-3 conference record. Now, in the first matchup that these two teams played, Texas won by 20 points, but this doesn't exclude the fact that Oklahoma is a solid team. So what does that need? What does Texas need to do, you ask? Well, be on your defensive A game and fight for those rebounds. Oklahoma leads the Big 12 in scoring, averaging 86.7 points per game. They also have the second highest field goal percentage, which is a 46 flat. Their guard, Taylor Robertson, is tied for first in the conference with 3-pointers made. If Texas really wants to win, they're going to have to defend well. But that's what they're good at. As I said just a second ago, the Longhorns have allowed the least amount of points in the Big 12. So it's going to be a top offense versus a top defense, and it's nothing that Texas can't handle. But let's get back to Oklahoma. They also have the top team in the Big 12 for defensive rebounding. So whenever shots don't quite fall down for the Sooners, Texas will really need to get aggressive and fight for as many second chance points, or take away as many second chance points from the Sooners as possible. The more points that the Horns get off of second chances, the better shot that they will have at creating a bigger lead. This Saturday's matchup is going to be filled with lots of talent, as it's the Big 12's top two teams battling out for the #1 spot. If all goes to plan, fans on both sides, Oklahoma and Texas, should expect to see a tough but very fun matchup play out.
Look forward to this rivalry matchup being rekindled once more now for the women's team. Thank you for joining us, Robert.
Thank you, Joe, for having me.
All right, when we come back to College Press Box, we're going to talk a little bit about the famed NBA All-Star Weekend that went down in Salt Lake City, Utah. You won't want to miss it. Welcome back to College Press Box. This past weekend, Salt Lake City, Utah was the host city for the famed NBA All-Star Weekend, where the most elite basketball talent gathered to showcase their elite skill. Our very own Michael Alvarez has more on what went down in Salt Lake City. Michael?
We are halfway through the NBA season, and that means it's time for All-Star Weekend. It was an action-packed 3 days, so without further ado, let's take a look at some of the highlights. Let's start with the three-point contest. This year's contest had a twist. The addition of the 2 starry balls that are found 30 feet from the basket, which are worth 3 points each, can change the outcome significantly. Indiana Pacers guard Tyrese Haliburton took advantage of these balls, as he looked like the early favorite in the event, tying a 3-point contest record of 31 in the first round, as he started off hot and continued that fire to end the round. Behind him, with 26 first-round points, was Portland Trail Blazers guard Damian Lillard, who stayed in the round as he hit 4 of his 5 money rack shots. And in third place, fellow Pacers guard and 2020 three-point contest champion Buddy Hield, who came in today as the favorite to finish with 23 points, staying consistent throughout the round. It was a tight matchup all the way through. In the final round, Hield was consistent in his corner shots, but failed to knock down any of the starry balls, but finished with a score to beat of 25. Lillard, who was participating in his career, his Weber State jersey in college, tallied up a total of 26 points, but he barely edged Hield. Lillard grabbed his first ever win in the contest after hitting 2 starry range threes, which are critical in his win. That was also the first time a Trailblazers guard won the event. Moving on to the dunk contest, we saw an array of first-time competitors in Houston Rockets guard KJ Martin, New Orleans Pelican guard Trey Murphy III, New York Knick and former Texas Longhorn forward Jericho Sims, and 76ers guard Mac McClung, who signed a contract on February 14th, only 4 days before the contest on the 18th. Though there were many impressive performances in this year's contest, Mac McClung stole the show with perfect 50s on all but one of his dunks to win the contest over Murphy in the final. For many, McClung reached the top of the NBA media back during his high school days when his Balls Life mixtape showed off his insane bunnies and crazy dunk attempts in games. He made his presence known in the first dunk as he jumped over 2 people, touched the backboard with the ball before finishing off the dunk that caused the stadium to erupt and left many of the players on the side shocked. He then sealed his victory with a 520-degree dunk, which ended in reversal, which again caused fans, judges, and players to practically fall out of their seats. Not to mention, performed the game-winning dunk in his old high school jersey. He then received a hug from NBA legend, judge, and 2-time dunk contest winner Dominique Wilkins to top off his memorable night. Finally, as we close the curtains on yet another NBA All-Star weekend that featured a dominating performance in the dunk contest by a newcomer and new fan favorite, and a lights-out shooting performance in a three-point contest that led to a familiar face taking the crown. The events were capped by a record-breaking performance in the All-Star game by Boston Celtics forward Jason Tatum. Tatum scored an all-time All-Star record of 55 points, 3 points better than the previous record of 52 set by Lakers forward Anthony Davis, leading Team Giannis to its first win in the captain's battle since its creation in 2018. Tatum shot an impressive 71 from the field and 55 from 3, with 1 steal, 6 assists, and a block to add to his historic stat line. He scored through many dunks and threes, though with it being the All-Star game, they were not very contested. This collectively earned him the Kobe Bryant All-Star Game MVP trophy. For many fans, it was a one-on-one battle between Tatum and Jaylen Brown in the third quarter that stole the show. In a stare-down hyped by teammates in the crowd, the two went shot for shot in the final minute of the third with a variety of tough shots, which is the perfect ending to his captivating star duel weekend. That's all for tonight. Let's send it back to Joseph at the desk.
All right, thank you again, Michael. When we return, we recap this last week in Texas sports. You won't want to miss it. Welcome back into College Press Box. This past Sunday at the XS Tennis Village in Chicago, number 7 Texas men's tennis advanced to its first ITA National Team Indoor Championships final in program history after a nail-biting 4-3 win over number 4 Michigan at the XS Tennis Village. Elliot Sparitzi, Cleve Harper, and Seem Woldib were all victorious in singles competition. The disastrous start for the Longhorn baseball and college baseball showdown continued on Sunday as Texas dropped to a measly 0-3 on the season against Vanderbilt. The story early on was a sloppy 4 errors from Texas in the second inning alone. With that 12-2 loss, Texas will head back to Austin for their home opener against A&M Corpus Christi. Texas softball, however, dominated the Texas Classic tournament. The star of the tournament was the first-year Longhorn Mac Morgan, who dominated Omaha and Incarnate Word as she improved her record to 3-0 on the season. Number 4 Texas Track and Field broke the DMR indoor record in their first race of the season. The 2-year program record was clocked at 9:22.74 by Cruz Gomez, Jonathan Jones, Yusuf Bizamana, and Creighton Carroza. Texas will travel to Lubbock on February 24th and 25th to defend their Big 12 Indoor Championship title for the 3rd consecutive season. Now let's take a look ahead at this week in Longhorn sports. On Tuesday, February 21st, baseball will compete against A&M Corpus Christi again, 5 p.m. on Longhorn Network. Men's basketball will play Iowa State, 8 p.m. on Longhorn Network as well. Then Wednesday, swimming and diving will compete in the Big 12 Championship on ESPN+. And then on Friday, softball will compete in the Lone Star State Invitational. And then baseball will cap it off with a competition against Indiana at 6:30, also on Longhorn Network. Saturday again on February 25th, women's tennis will compete against Stanford at 12. Men's basketball will compete against the Baylor Bears at 1 p.m. on ESPN or ESPN2. Baseball will compete against the Indiana Hoosiers on 1 p.m. on Longhorn Network. And then women's basketball will compete at Oklahoma at 1 p.m. Finally, on Sunday, baseball will compete against Indiana one more time on Longhorn Network, while men's tennis will compete against the A&M Aggies at 3 p.m. That'll wrap things up for this week's episode of College Press Box. Make sure to tune in to our other shows this week, including College Crossfire on Wednesday and 1-0 Sports on Friday. Thank you to our analysts, everyone in Master Control, our executive producer Samantha Pearl, and everyone else at TSTV. I'm Joseph Duffey. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.